I'm the digital publications manager at Getty. I've been at Getty for about 11 years now, which is a lot of years, but they've been good. Over the course of 11 years, we've published, among other projects I've worked on, we've done about 20 open access online publications. This page here, which is at getty.edu, publications, digitalpubs.html. Is our old website, so excuse the design. We are working on a new one. But this lists all of the books that we've published in those years. The first ones were actually in 2016. So what does that mean? 9 years that we've been doing these. Th- They've really been mostly collection catalogs and proceedings volumes. So those are the kinds of the things that we started with. We started with the collection catalogs coming out of the online scholarly catalog initiative that the Getty Foundation sponsored many years ago. And collection catalogs were something that we knew right away that we wanted to put online in this format. So that was our sort of bread and butter. So these first couple were collection catalogs. We have a book on metadata that was a kind of reference volume. That was one exception to the rule of collection catalogs versus proceedings volumes. Another collection catalog. Here's a proceedings volume, another proceedings volume, another collection catalog, another proceedings volume, and on and on. So the first many books that we did really fell into those two categories. I think largely because they were things that we knew we wanted to put online. The collection catalogs just made more sense there. They were more reference books. They were things that we weren't expecting people to read cover to cover. Mostly people are going to go in, dive in, get the information they want of particular collection objects, and then get out, more of a kind of a quick reference rather than a full read. Similarly with proceedings volumes, I think that these are things where people in the field there may be some scholars that are going to want to read the full all the papers. Mostly they're going to look for the specific papers that they want to read, get that paper, maybe get a couple others, and then move on. So these kind of more referencey works just made sense for us online. Also, of course, in terms of print production, we found over the years that collection catalogs, as you all I'm sure know, they are expensive to produce and really hard to go back and reprint if you need to. Also, it's hard to keep them up to date. And then proceedings volumes, while not as expensive to produce, they tend to be a much more niche audience. We print much smaller quantities, and we found that putting them online gets us a much wider audience as well. So having collection catalogs and proceedings volumes really made sense for us, and that's just kind of our bread and butter of what we've done. And that's what almost all of these are until our most recent ones. And those are the ones I'm going to focus on talking about today. Before we get into the specific publications that were the newer ones, just a little bit of background. So all of these were published with Quire. So if you don't know, Quire is our open source multi-format publishing tool. So it's a tool that we developed at the Getty to use for publishing those books. It was something that we needed to be able to publish books in, and we had a vision of how we wanted to do that. We couldn't find a tool that already existed to do that, so we started developing our own. It is a kind of combination of many tools, so it's our own work, but it's also building off of existing open source tools, publishing tools. And we then, of course, open sourced it ourselves back out to the community. So it's available for anyone to use for free. The homepage for Quire is at quire.getty.edu. You can read all about it. Quire's really the main things about Quire to know in a sort of nutshell are that it is multi-format. So it publishes a website, an online site for your book, but it also puts out a PDF version and an ebook or EPUB version as well, all from the same set of files. So it's one workflow for those three different formats. Also, it's a publishing tool, not a platform. So this is something we're offering for people to use to publish their own books and then host them on their own, distribute them on their own. We don't have any connection to them afterwards as the Getty. It's just something it's a tool like InDesign is a tool that you can use to work on your books. But it is totally free to use. This website that got more information on choir, if you're interested in using it, we're of course happy to speak with you. But there's a lot of information here. There's also a nice community showcase, which will you can see what other people have done with choir, other museums and other universities, institutions, individuals who have found uses for choir themselves. And then of course all the features, documentation, training, workshops, all of that kind of stuff is the website. So that's just something that I'm happy to talk about more, but it's not going to be my focus. I really want to talk about what we've done with choir, what kind of books we're working on at the Getty. But they've all been built with this tool. Okay, looking at this first one, this is Ancient Glass. This is a collection catalog, and this is just, I want to establish the sort of baseline of the work that we're doing. So this is a very straightforward, and this is a collection catalog that's coming out this April, so 2 months. And this is a very straightforward in terms of like our general approach to collection catalogs. And these are just like the ones I was showing earlier, follows a similar format where it's a linear reading experience, kind of traditional directors forward, acknowledgments, that kind of thing. And then there's a map in here that we've added. There is the overview of the contents, but then the main part of it, there's an essay in here, the main part is the catalog area. So this is the full catalog, and this is a traditional, like our typical presentation for us, where you have kind of all of the objects in here. This is a very large collection catalog. It's beautiful as well, given the sort of diversity of these objects and the sort of lovely color of this ancient glass. But there's, I think, 500 some objects. And so you can navigate by object. There are ways to filter then these collection catalogs. So you can filter by culture, by technique, and these filters are individual for each catalog. So we will work with the curators, with the authors to determine what, if any, filters are useful. It doesn't have to be the same from catalog to catalog, and it isn't usually. So sometimes you might want to be, it might be meaningful for a scholar to filter by place. Sometimes it might not be. So these are the filters we've applied here. And then if you click through to an object, and this is again a kind of typical thing. This is a kind of for us, kind of an out of the box collection catalog. You get an image here, a zoomable image or multiple images. There's a couple different views in this particular one. We have the kind of tombstone information here, a link to go view this object in the collection. So for us at the Getty, collection catalogs and all of our online publications are really, we think of them as authored at a particular date and time, kind of that sort of frozen snapshot of that object at that moment. Whereas we see our collection catalog, our collection pages, our website has the most up-to-date information. So if we come back to this page in 10 years, we may revise it a little bit, but and that would be noted here if it was. But we expect it largely to stay the same. It's kind of like this is how we saw this object at this time. But if you then 10 years from now click over to the view from collection, you'll see something. You may see a lot more and a lot different information. But typical presentation here, bibliography entries, where you have the pop-up references, and then you can kind of go from object to object, and they kind of look the same. This has, gotten us quite far. You saw we've done a number of these collection catalogs for the Getty Museum collections. We have a bunch more in the pipeline that we will be doing in the future, and we'll continue to do this kind of work because we found it useful. We found it really extends the reach of the collection with objects that have been featured in these catalogs tend to get much more traffic both from the catalog itself, but then also to the collections pages. So we see a lot more people finding sort of niche objects that might otherwise get lost in the collection are sort of being surfaced through these catalogs. So we'll continue to do them. So that's a sort of baseline of where we are. Now I want to talk about kind of building off of that, some of those ideas that are in that collection catalog and in those sort of earlier work that we were doing. So this is a publication that we put out last year. It's called Artists' Things. It's by two authors who were writing about objects or things from 18th century France that were either owned by or connected to artists of that period. And so the whole book is a kind of a sort of exploration of these objects and the stories that those objects tell. So it is in a way a kind of collection catalog. So this has got a different kind of design. We did some custom design on this compared to what we saw in that ancient glass catalog, which is more out of the box. But the basic functionality is the same. The basic idea here is the same, where we have these a grid of objects. We have some filters, and again, you can see these are different filters from the ones that were in that glass catalog because they're specific to this particular book. But you can go and see this collection of objects that these authors have brought together. And this, rather than being a collection that exists in a particular institution, this is a sort of distributed collection. These are objects that exist all over the world. In some cases, they don't exist at all. They're just kind of a record of an object. Sometimes they are not a specific object, but the idea of an object. So it's a little bit more sort of conceptual in that way. But the same idea where you can kind of navigate from object to object. The sort of interesting thing for me here is that the authors I came to this, they wrote this book with this sort of data in mind, with the data of the objects in mind. So if I click through to book, I can see that up at the top here, we have the kind of this sort of metadata about the book, about this object, about what material it was made from, what themes it applies to, and what type of object it is. And this is something that the authors thought through from the very beginning. They had this idea of the data of the object right from the beginning, and they wrote that data into their Word documents as they were writing their essays on these individual objects. That then really lends itself nicely to a digital presentation where we can take that data and really help people navigate with it. So if I'm interested in the theme of leisure, I can click on that and it takes me back to that main view, but now filtered for the other objects that have that theme as well. And I can find another one to click through and I can look at the snuff box. So I can navigate that way. I can also, they've thought about it as connected like from object to object. So this snuff box object, they also mention the handkerchief. So in where that handkerchief is mentioned, which is also an object in the book, we can click on that. And again, pulling the data about that object, navigate in different ways. So I can go right to the handkerchief entry. I can, again, kind of follow my nose through types of objects, themes, materials, and where else handkerchief is mentioned in, and kind of navigate that way. So, and here's one, you can see these bolded terms here where there's many different ways of navigating. And so this is something they thought of from the very beginning as a real digital presentation, which for me as a digital publisher has been really exciting in that these are authors who, if they had started writing this book 20 years ago, they might have still had this idea of giving data to objects, of trying to connect objects, but obviously you wouldn't have been able to navigate in the same way. You also would have ended up with things like we have also here, these sort of indexes. So in a print book, you'd see an index by theme. So I could see the administration theme would have these objects. Much more static presentation, but the authors were thinking through like, oh, what can we do? How can we like really take advantage of the digital space in an interesting way? And take that collection catalog idea and really do something new and creative with it, and move that forward. So that's been a great project for us. I also, as a sort of side note, this is a great book to read too. I highly recommend it. I didn't know anything about 18th century French artists or art, but these little essays that they write on these objects are lovely, and worth stopping by for. So I don't say that about all of our books in terms of a reading recommendation, but this one I actually would. So this is another one where it's built. So it's this first one where it's building off of the idea of that collection catalog, that baseline collection catalog. This next one was just published last week. This is Guidelines for the Technical Examination of Bronze Sculpture. It's an international project that really is intended to be the sort of text around the idea of studying bronze sculpture. It's a reference work. It's supposed to be for anyone who is really studying bronze cast sculpture, bronze sculpture, and really anyone who needs to figure out how to study it, how to examine it, what to do with it, how to conserve it. This is a reference that we want them to go to. So if I start through here, one of the sort of the main chapters are organized, and let me just jump to one. It's really heavy in the information. So it's like less of a reading thing and more of a like we expect someone to come in and be looking and kind of drilling down into specific areas that they're trying to get to. But also the idea being like, how can we then let people follow the sort of path that they need to follow and find the information, even though it's scattered, it could be anywhere in this book because it's such a large book. We wanted to sort of be able to indicate different things across the book, like different places. So, for example, there's a really in-depth vocabulary section. So there are these small, like any like vocab glossary term, you can link to it. But then if I click through to the more button, you have a full entry here where it's got images to that term, the sources for that term, and then translations, which also themselves come with sources and that thing. So really a deep level glossary, but that you can access in sort of really small ways while you're reading, and where and when you need it. Similarly, you'll have something like a table where that table, this is table 4, and well, it might be useful here. It might also be useful other places as well. I can make it a little bigger there. So not limiting table 4 to be available just in one spot. And then also with images as well. So if I expand some of these things, you can see some small thumbnails. Again, these figures are going to be scattered through these thumbnails are going to be scattered throughout the book, where and repeated throughout the book, again, where people need them. So thinking of each little section as its own little mini area, where you then can get to branch off to other things, and start to, again, this is something we like in print. And there is a print edition of this. In the print edition, there is one big section of all the images together, and then a section of the text, and you have to you go back and forth. So the text reference, you see it says figure 55, and you then flip over in the book to figure 55 and flip back and forth. This in the digital space, of course, we can do that all in one space. We don't have to send people away necessarily. We can pop it open right here, where and when they need it. So that this is so again a big reference work like that, trying to do more and more with how we're organizing the information, but also doing more in this case with the images themselves. So let me share some of those. And let me 1 second here. Let me open up this. Visual atlas of features. So again, we have this page in this book it's a collection catalog page. But instead of a collection of objects, in this case, it's a collection of all the figures in the book. And we have some basic filtering here as well, but this is just a chance for readers to see all the images and maybe if they're looking for something, like they can look visually to see if they're like, oh, well, that's the thing that looks like what I want to know, and follow that path. But these things then each have their own page. And along with sort of the basic zooming images that have kind of become standard in our catalogs, we're really doing a lot more with other kinds of images. We're trying to explore areas of what more can we do with images in these books. So this is a very basic example of like a layered images where you have a daylight version and then an ultraviolet version, being able to click back and forth. So layers like that. Similarly, we can do layers that are transparent. So we can have overlays that you can kind of see through and be additive and add them up and down over each other to annotate different areas of an image, in this case, an X-ray. And then let me let that load. There we go. And here's just a more complicated version of that where we can have many, many different kinds of layers. And you can also zoom in on those things and open up different things and kind of explore an object that way, rather than having 5 or 6 images that are like, here's the X-ray, here's one with these overlays, here's one with these overlays. In a digital space, of course, we can do that all at once. So that's something we built into Quire for this particular project. We haven't officially launched it to the Quire overall as to the open source version of Quire, but that will be coming and documented in the coming months. But that's another thing that we're exploring in this book. This is an example. So we have a 3D model. This is something that actually we didn't put into this book, or we didn't. Sorry, we put in this book. We didn't put into Quire. So there were maybe 6 or 7 3D models that the authors wanted to be able to show in this book. So because this is an online publication, it's a website. A website can do like a publication website can do anything any website can do potentially. And so we're using a small library. It's an open source library called Model Viewer by Google that lets us to we can plug that library in, display these 3D objects, just in this case, and kind of explore that. And this is something, whereas the annotated images that we felt like there are a lot of them. We can see multiple use cases across multiple publications. And so we're going to build that into Quire. We're going to make that part of our sort of baseline, available features for our authors moving forward. 3D models, while it's interesting, we didn't have as much of a use case for them looking ahead. So this is a way for us to kind of experiment with that, to include them in a book, but to not make the larger investment or commit to them as something that we'll keep in. One challenge with any of these things that we're doing when we're doing a new kind of object like this, as I mentioned, Quire is multi-format, so it's on a website first and foremost. That's our primary edition, but we also wanted to put out a PDF, which we create then into a print book, and an EPUB ebook as well. So those formats aren't going to have all this interactivity. You won't be able to have a 3D model in a PDF the same way. So we're always thinking about those fallbacks and what they will look like in those other formats. So in the case of the PDF for this book, for this 3D image, they'll have a just static image version of it. And I think I should have looked. I believe oftentimes they'll have like a URL to point to like the online, like a video would have a static image and then a URL to say, we know you can't see this video in the print book, but here it is available online. So we're always thinking about that. But again, and finding ways to sort of experiment and without making a big commitment, but see what else we can do using existing tools. We don't want to over-invest in something like this necessarily, not at least not right out of the gate. This is something that's less flashy than a 3D image, but I think is pretty interesting. So this is a kind of a typical like figure. It's more of almost a chart or a graph. It's got text in it. In this case, it's actually also referencing figure numbers. So there's a little figure here that says if you want to, basically the idea is, if you want an example of distortion, you can go see figure whatever, and click through. So, in a typical way, these are kind of put in often as static images, but then they become both an accessibility issue because that's an inaccessible format to have that much text. Really, even with alt text, you can't really describe what's going on in this image. And then also you're not giving them any way to link into those figures when it's referencing a specific figure. Here we found the thing we started experimenting with, and I don't think we've nailed it yet, but this idea I think is really promising, is in one, we've included it as text. So we've pulled this out and included just the text version with live links that you can then go. And of course, this text is accessible, that can be read by a screen reader. If we were to go a little bit further here, we would have and should have put in little descriptions of each of the little images along with this text. But that's the idea, is like a kind of pretty simple way of you have a graphic thing and then translating it to a way that makes it both more accessible and more interactive. But also in this particular one, it's not actually a JPEG. It's not a static image. It's actually an SVG. So these links are live. So an SVG is a format that lets you have live links and lets you even do some interactivity and some other things if you wanted. And so we've put this in as an SVG that again makes it more interactive and if done correctly will make it more accessible as well. We have a lot of charts and graphs and things like this in our books. And so I think that the idea of exploring what is the plain text version of that and what is an SVG version of that are really promising and something that we're going to be exploring moving forward. That's an open tab. So, and then I think then this one is another example of another kind of diagram. It's a step-by-step diagram. So step 1, step 2, step 3, etc. And it's a zooming image. So I can zoom in and see, and I can then go read what step 8 is and that kind of thing. I can move myself along. Another question we asked ourselves in this book, though, was, well, what would be a better experience for that? How can we make that more useful for a reader? And so we've built in the ability to now click on a link in this sort of side area and affect the text, affect the image on the other side. So we can zoom into an image, into to different areas of an image by clicking a link. If this image had those annotation layers on, we could turn annotation layers on and off, and that kind of thing. So starting to explore, if I go way back to, let's see, this original collection catalog page, like how can I take this information here and really integrate it and enliven it with helping viewers navigate this object. So when I'm describing a handle or if I'm describing a particular aspect of this thing, wouldn't it be great if I could click a link here, zoom into that thing, that specific thing as an example? Something that maybe I wouldn't want to put in a whole figure, whole comparative figure for, but something that I just like to enhance the experience for the online reader. And so that's what we're doing here is adding in that technology to be able to do that. And we did it for this book, and they're going to be exploring that more broadly in other books. And it will be something that also is added into the sort of core Quire, as we call it, or the open source version of Quire that we distribute. And then lastly, in this book, building off of that technology, off of that idea of clicking a link and being able to affect the frame next to it, we have a series of case studies in this book. So in this one, the authors were really interested in that, they had this big reference work. They loved that you could click through and see the vocabs and see the figures and go from section to section and really get into the fine-grained details of the really sort of this really scholarly work and this really detail specific. But they also wanted a moment to help story tell how the book might be used in a way, or how bronze is studied in a more sort of narrative way. And so they had these case studies of people who had gone in and studied a particular bronze and looking at particular aspects of it. But to really heighten that storytelling aspect, we wanted it to be more of a narrative aspect rather than you have to figure it out, you have to zoom into the image, you have to read all the text and know where to look and click something to open the right figure. We wanted it to be more kind of just natural storytelling. And so in this case, we're using the same technology lets us change that image over on the side or zoom in, but we've activated it on the sort of scrolling. So we can scroll through now and go into different aspects of the image, open up new images, switch images from thing to thing. There's one with annotation layers, and I can zoom into those and turn on a new annotation layer. So it's a kind of a scrolly telling is what it's called generally, but it became a natural progression from, well, if we can click a link over here to zoom into this image, what if we just went one step further and said, well, what if you just scrolled by that link? What if that link, as it came into view, it triggered that view? And so it becomes a much more narrative and storytelling like presentation, which we're excited about. This is the first time we're rolling it out is in this book, and we expect that it will seed ideas for other authors and other projects going forward that we're putting out in the Getty, and we hope to see it as we release it into the open source version of Quire. We hope to see it used out there as well. So I will leave that one there. Okay, so that's Bronze Guidelines. That's a big one, and again, just came out last week. And as it was a years long project, also I'll say that some of these, mostly our Quire projects, take from once we've been given the manuscript, it's about a year from manuscript to publication date, typically. In this case, it was multiple years for Bronze Guidelines, and in some cases, it's also been multiple years, and sometimes also leading up even before the manuscript is created. There's years of preparation ahead of that in terms of trying to, which we'll see in another project we're about to look at. And this, I'll just switch to it right now, called the Scores Project. There's multiple years before we even get to the manuscript stage because of all the sort of working out, what can we do, how are we going to sort of best present this material? Authors are writing toward being digital, whereas many of our early projects, they were written as print books. They were written as books that could be in print. And these newer projects are written with digital in mind from the very get-go, which means that the authors are really engaging with how best we can use that space. So this project is another one that was years and years in the making. And is will be coming out in, I think, pub date is May, if I'm not mistaken, this year. And so is nearing its final stages. So it's called the Scores Project. It's about a group of, focuses on a group of avant-garde scores that in sort of music and art and literature and dance that are in the Getty Research Institute's collections. So there are 11 chapters, one on each of the sort of main scores in the collection. And each chapter, if we go into the first one, this is a music one of Morton Feldman on his piece Intersection 3, which is a musical piece. In these books, we have an initial commentary. If I click through here, it's an essay on that score, includes comparative figures. But then the sort of the real meat of this book is in the surfacing all these materials from our archives. So in each section, here's images of the score itself, the actual thing. In this case, it's this graphic notation, sort of musical piece. Then there's a playback section where we have audio, video, digital, audio and video and interactive things to kind of enliven that and to sort of show what they sounded like and how they were performed in different contexts. And then there's an archive section which digs into all the materials around that score. So the flyers and photographs and newspaper clippings and all of that kind of thing, correspondence and notes from the artists. All of this surfaced from the archive that's otherwise in the Getty Research Institute is semi-available, but mostly only you have to go in and see it in person. You have to dig through the folders. So this is a kind of curatorial effort to pull these things out and give new access to them out into the world. So each chapter is while it is focused around it has that kind of commentary essay. The meat of it is around these objects, which themselves have in some cases quite lengthy captions and extended information about them. So that's in so all of those then become in this sort of object index, which again is just a collection catalog and loaded a little funny there. But it's a preview version. We're not done yet, so I won't worry about that. But this is, again, a series of filters that we can filter by, in this case, years and people and types of things. But it is, again, just a presentation of a lot of objects on a page that you can then click through and see other things. In this case, we can also see them large. So we can go through and this one's got, again, a huge number of images, but we can kind of see them here. Then we can click through and see them as well. So similar to Bronze Guidelines, this has given us a chance also to think through what those images can be beyond just a zooming image. So in this case, we have a video image. So this is the top portion here is part of that score from Morton Feldman, in the score that as he wrote it, in this sort of really graphic notation. And make it a little bigger here. And then the bottom part is the David Tudor, who is a pianist, who he then translated that sort of the graphic notation at the top. And let me reload the page a second. Graphic notation at the top, and he wrote it as like true note, like just as in more sort of traditional note format, and then could play it. But we wanted to explain and show how that works. So I worked with the author to create this thing, and I'll try to see. We'll see how we play it. I think I have a score. I think I have a thing. So as we go through, it's animating it's a little score viewer, animating what's being played, hear it and see it as well. So this for us, like, obviously is if it was in print, that would take pages to explain, well, here's this note and here's this thing and here's how that played and, go over here, go somewhere else to go see it. And of course, in digital, we can do that all at once in a single video. We actually created this. So this particular book has been a lot about media production and working with authors to find like how we can best present some of these things and best show them. And so we actually built this animation using a digital tool called P5JS, which is an animation tool that you can use, that we could have a kind of live version if we wanted online, a version that was more sort of native to a website. And we built it that way. But then we found that in the end of the day, we just needed like thinking ahead to like preservation and making sure that people can access this animation in the sort of most most likely way down the road. We've just recorded those sort of fancier web interactives as a video because it didn't need any more functionality than that. And this then we feel more comfortable that this will last a long time. But using those digital tools let us create it in the first place. So we have a number of these kinds of score animations throughout the book. We also did took that same score, that Morton Feldman score, and broke it up. So said, well, how can we explain like how each, or how can we demonstrate how each sort of note here is connected to a specific sound. And so the author clipped out the little area of the image and then created a little clip of the sound. And we created this little like keyboard so I can click on it and the different little mini player piano. We also have a hover version here. So if I and then there's a keyboard version too, so I can play on my keyboard using the sort of 1 through 9 keys, and plus a couple others. A very simple thing, not something that was sort of built into Choir or something that we had used anywhere else or will likely ever use again, since we're not a music publisher, but a kind of fun way to play around with and explore what we can do digitally that we couldn't do otherwise. And in this particular thing, in terms of the development, I talked about how in the 3D model of the other one, we didn't want to over invest in something like that. We wanted to use an existing library because we knew it was just a kind of one-off, or we didn't know if we'd reuse it again. Similarly with this, we're almost surely not going to use this kind of technology again, so we needed to find a way to do it on the cheap. And it is very simple in terms of the coding. So actually, I ended up using this was one of my first experiments in AI, for better or worse. And I don't know that I'll do too much AI work, but it was an interesting experiment where I said the prompt was basically I have a selection of 12 images. Each one has a corresponding music file. When you click on I want a grid of those images, and when a user clicks on it, I want it to play the music file, the corresponding file. And it said, great, here's the HTML, here's the script you need. And I could practice that. I could go, okay, that looks good. But then I could give it more prompts, and I said, okay, and I would say, oh, well, can you make the grid do this, or can you make sure the grid is responsive? And then I started thinking, oh, well, that looks good. Can you please, can we do a hover option? So can you add a button at the bottom, and then so a user can select hover and then have the music play on hover over. So I was able to kind of create this thing through language, through just asking for it, and correcting it where it went wrong, and then embedding the resulting file, or the resulting HTML and JavaScript and CSS into this screen here. So again, another kind of experiment of what we can do. And this is another audio version. It's just an audio clip of the thing, but we used that same library that we used to create the animation. We wanted to see if, play around with creating a specific, but I'll let it play for a second. An animation specific to our audio. So rather than just having a sort of blank screen here with an audio playing, we're using a visualizer. We created a visualizer that's specific to the book, that we then create and put into a video format, because for us, it was actually, I felt more comfortable with our preservation options for video, just because of the way we're set up. We have all of our videos through a private Getty Vimeo account and embedded that way, and so there's a lot of backup and a lot of people using that account, so it's not a kind of one-off, so it feels very comfortable. Anyway, so again, thinking through how can we best present this particular material in this case, and then just a couple last examples on this one. This is another out of scores, a little box here it's a wooden box, and then it's called the Water Yam by the artist George Brecht. And inside are 100 some little cards, and each card is a kind of score that you can do, a little performance that you might do, or an action that you might take as a score, as a artwork that you would perform yourself. And so we wanted this water yam is the focus of one of the chapters, but we thought about how can we best, this is a wooden box with a stack of cards in it. How do we best like materialize that? How do we make that sort of seen and understood online? How do we make it accessible? And so along with the static images of it, this one also has a rotating image, which is a little bit in this view, it's a little bit uh, jerky a little bit, like jumpy, but it'll be smoother in the final one. But it a rotating object, so you get a sense of if it as an object, you can look around it. Of course, you can't look in here in the cards themselves in this view. So for that, we have something that's a little bit more data driven. So this is all of the cards from that publication individually. And so you can scroll down and see all the cards. The similar to the data we saw in artist things or in other collection catalogs, the author of this chapter has gone through and applied these tags to different cards. So there's this one that has a vessel tag. So if I click that, I can see all the other cards that she thinks that also have something to do with vessel. And then some of them also I can go further and I can read, there's a sort of extended caption about them. I can zoom in to make them bigger. This particular one, drip music, is the actual focus of that chapter. So she spends a lot of time on this particular one. But again, it's just we don't need to have just the object of the picture of the object, just this sort of rotating thing, or just a static image or multiple static images. We can also have the space to show all of the cards within it, and not only show them, but really make them sort of findable and accessible to other people. Here's all the cards that are yellow in it, and here's a little bit of text about the yellow. So, and again, this is like a whole nother kind of thing, just special for this this particular object, but we're building off of things we've already done. That building off the idea of here's a grid of images, here's tags that we can use. How can we filter to show just the ones? And we're doing it on a sort of it's like a mini catalog within this larger catalog. So that's some of the highlights of the Scores project. Again, this one, and this is a long-running one that's coming out in May that we're really excited about. I think it's going to be a great one. So the last couple of things I want to talk about are just go back for a moment, and then we'll have a few minutes for a Q&A. If you have any questions, this rotating idea. So we have the sequences, image sequences like this, these rotating images. This is in the open source version of Quire now. It's fully documented. You can add these into your own Quire projects if you want. What I found interesting about these image sequences is that I didn't actually know at the beginning is that all a rotating image like this is like there's a 3D model that's different. Like if I could find that original 3D model, this one, oh, look at that. This one I can move in any direction, any axis, right? I'm not just rotating it around a single axis. I'm able to sort of flip it around and twirl it and kind of look all over it. That's kind of a true 3D model. These rotating ones are actually not like that. All they will do is rotate around a single axis that I can I'm just turning it this way, right? Around that sort of one directional. I didn't know this originally when the first time we did one of these, but that's made up by just a sequence of images. So the imaging staff will put an object on a turntable, and they will take an image at all degrees, at one for every degree. So they'll have 360 images. So rather than having front, side, back, other side, they'll have 360 images all around that object. And then an image viewer like this, a sequence viewer, is just loading all of those images, and then quickly, as you drag your mouse, it's quickly flipping them in and out. It's like putting it's just showing you this one, then that one, then this one, then that one. And so it has this sort of illusion of a 3D object that you're turning, when really all you're doing is flipping really quickly through a slideshow that just happens to be like of a rotating object. So I don't know if you knew that, but when I didn't know that when I was sort of mystified by how these things were made, and I assumed they were more of a scan, and then I was told it's just a sequence of images, and that seemed really interesting to me, that it's just a sequence of images. And so one of the things when we were building this in, I started to think a little bit about what else you could do for a sequence of images. So and this is the kind of thing that what we hope for when we publish books like Bronze Guidelines or Scores or Artist Things. We hope that, and we've seen this happen, that other authors, artists and such will see this work there and start to think about how they can use it in interesting ways. And so I kind of was doing that on a sort of my own small scale here. And so I did a little sort of demo project at one point of different kinds of rotating images. So here's my just straightforward rotating sculpture. We can have at the Getty and the Bronze Guidelines book, we actually have quite a few we have a rotating X-ray rig that they can shoot X-rays in kind of like 360-degree image as well. So we have those. We have also tomography sequences. So tomography is like a slice. So it's not just it's a in this case like an X-ray, but rather than it's taking an X-ray at one depth and then another depth and another depth, and so you're just kind of seeing all the way through that object. So we can use that same viewer to slide in and out this like in and out and rather than around and through a sequence of images. But then also in a sequence of images, so this is a Muybridge. This is a detail of a Muybridge. If you know Muybridge, he's famous for famous photographer famous for animal locomotion or other locomotion images, where it's a kind of flip book or kind of like multiple still frames of something moving, of an animal moving, of a person moving, running, walking, jumping, whatever. And so they're often you'll see them if you see them in a museum, if you see them on our collection pages, they will just be a kind of a single sheet with a grid of images. But I can use that same sequence image viewer to cut those images out and create my own little flip book, so I can drag and see the horse running, and understand not only so I could if I was publishing something like this, I could publish here's Muybridge's work as he created it, as you can look at it, the physical object, but here's actually what it's animating, and here you can see it and interact with it. Here is a calendar, which is kind of a day-to-day calendar. And so you can like scrub through the whole year, and sort of clicking and dragging. And that aspect of clicking and dragging something and like interacting with it in that way has a kind of interesting, I don't know if it reads as I'm demonstrating it, but if you're yourself, if you have interact with these objects, a clicking object or a rotating object, maybe you've done those. When you click and drag on it, it has a different feel. You get a sense of it as an object more, and you get a sense of it and like a sense of control over it in interacting with it in a way that you don't if you were just watching a video or if you were just kind of clicking on an arrows to go through a slideshow one by one. Here's another one where this is actually like a little video of holding, this is not the real card, but it's like a little fake postcard from the scores book. But the video itself is a person and me flipping this card. And so I can use that dragging interface to, instead of just showing recto and verso, maybe showing something that gives you more of a sense of it as a physical object, as a card, rather than just a kind of flat JPEG that you're seeing, like here's one view, here's another view, click, click, and done. This is more like, oh, I see that this is a little postcard. I see how it fits in someone's hand. I have a sense of its physicality. This is something I really liked. We didn't end up using it in scores, but I like it, and maybe like another chance at some point down the road. And then lastly, this is the Get part of the Getty Garden. It's actually a piece by the artist Robert Irwin. So the garden itself was his artwork, that's installed permanently at the Getty. And I went there one day and I just took my phone and made a quick walk sort of video as I walked down the path. But then I export that video into individual images and I put them in the sequence viewer. And now I can click and drag my way through as a little sort of virtual tour going through the garden, which I think, again, is sort of really interesting to me. So that's what we're hoping to see with all this work we were doing, is that people look at some of these tools that we're building, look at some of the things we're putting in, and find new ways to use them, new and interesting ways. And then one way we are seeing that, like one very sort of nascent way we're seeing someone build off that sequence idea is in this book that will be coming out, I think, June or July of this year, on Ed Ruscha's Streets of Los Angeles. Is an archive that we have at the Getty. As part of this book, we worked with a group called, they're a design firm and mapping firm out of San Francisco, and they're Stamen, Stamen. They had worked with us a bunch on earlier Ruscha projects because they're really experts in mapping and digital visualization. And so we worked with them again to do we wanted to do some visualizations in this book, which the book itself is a collection of essays around the archive. So kind of more a straightforward, like nothing I mean, it's an interesting book. I don't want to say that, but like it's in terms of what it's doing in that way, it's a very standard presentation. But these visualizations gave us a chance to again find ways to take advantage of the space. And so when Stamen was, we were brainstorming with them, they saw that flip book, they saw the things I was doing with the sequence images, and they got interested in that. And so we have these sequences, which are, let's see if I get this. This is not loading, right? So that'll. This will be the one thing that didn't work, I think. But this, oh, there we go. So I can click and drag my way through kind of like this little flip book of these, in this case, a map of explaining the way the photography worked over time in Rouché's book. And so it's a little slideshow that again could just be like I can click on one thing and see the slide and see the slide and see a slide, or I could see a string of images. But the clicking and dragging more flipbook style gives the user, I think, a real sense of interacting with that information in an interesting way that will hopefully also prove valuable to them. Um, all right, and with that abrupt stop, I went a little longer than I wanted to, but we have at least maybe 5 minutes or so for questions. Thank you so much for the time, also just listening. I appreciate you being here. But yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions. I'll